And welcome back. We are now going to dive into a new topic here, which is that of the if statement, which is going to be our first type of conditional or branching statement that we're going to look at. Now, branching statements are, of course, something new for us to kind of look at. Let's say, suppose we want to test the value of an object or a variable and see if it has a certain value. So, for example, if we want to see if it's a positive number or a negative number. This is often accomplished by using branching statements that use what's known as boolean expressions. The most common branching statement, of course, is the if statement. If will evaluate the boolean expression simply to see if the value is true. For example, we can use it to check to see if a person has spent more than $12. We can just say, is it greater than 12? And that's an easy way for us to do this. Now, if we look at a couple example if statements, here's our first one. We have if num is less than 40, and we're just going to have it print out num is less than 40. And how this works is it's going to test num is less than 40. So let's say num in this case is, let's say, 20. Well, if it is 20, well, is 20 less than 40? Yes. So this would be true. So then it would print out num is less than 40. If num was, let's say, 60, is 60 less than 40? No. So it would not print anything. In fact, it's going to completely skip this line of code here. Let's look at another one. If x is less than 10, x plus plus. Notice there is no print line statement here. Instead, all it's going to do is increase the value of x by 1. Because we can do pretty much almost any kind of code that we've seen up to this point inside of an if statement that we have done outside an if statement. And we can even do this with methods here for some things like our string. So for example, string word is equal to computer. If word.length is less than 5, print out short word. And in this case, we would know that word is not less than 5. It's actually greater than 5, so it would not print anything. Now, one thing to know is if we start testing these things, we're going to have a little bit of knowledge of math and understand how we use our less than or greater than symbols here. Now, those things that we've all seen, so those all different Boolean expressions, these are the arguments of an if statement, and these are those Boolean expressions that we mentioned previously. So here's another one. It was that if hours is greater than 40. All right, this thing in the parentheses is what Java uses to test the code to determine if a value is simply true or if it is false. Now, Boolean expressions are pretty powerful things here. And there's actually quite a slew of them. Now, we're not going to necessarily get into all of these today because for the first two, for example, the double ampersand means and the vertical pipes, that means or. We're not going to worry about those right now. We're going to actually table those a little bit, and we're going to come back and look at those two later. But I just want you to go ahead and get those. The ones that follow are the ones that we definitely want to kind of start brushing up and getting familiar with, though. So less than, of course, is less than, greater than is greater than, and of course, one is a left angle bracket, one's a right angle bracket. If we have the left angle bracket followed by an equal sign, this is less than or equal to. Similarly, the right angle bracket and equal sign is greater than or equal to. Now, the ones that usually start tripping up students are the following ones. So we have a not, which is an exclamation point, equal to, followed by equal sign, okay? You're going to see this quite often. Whenever we get to booleans, whenever you use the exclamation point, just remember it means not. It means it's going to be the opposite of that. But the one that is the most commonly tripping up people is this one. The double equal sign, which means equal to. A lot of people think, well, if I use one equal sign, shouldn't that mean equals to? Well, no, it doesn't, because this, if we use a single equal sign, that means make it the value of it. It's changing the value. So think of like when we say like num equals num plus 1. Well, we're saying num is equal to that value, not testing to see if it's equal. And that's the key thing here. A double equal sign means to test to see if something is equal. It does not mean to change the value to make it equal. So very important distinction there. Now, when we actually look at formatting our if statements, the thing about it you have to remember is that conditionals, which is the thing we're kind of really diving into here, are branching statements that are used to test whether certain conditions met. The way we can kind of think about this with our if statements is that if something is true, then do something. All right. So, and if that's not true, well, we're not going to do it. All right. Now, I can't stress this enough as people who are just learning to program. All right. We are very much in the habit of when we get to a line of code, we want to put a semicolon. Don't do this here with a if statement. All right. And the reason for that is it could lead to some potential syntax errors if we're not careful, or not necessarily syntax errors. We could have logic errors. So we just have to be careful how we're putting these in here. A much better recommendation is instead to use curly brackets. And technically, if we only have one line of code, we can use just a semicolon here. But I do recommend that we use curly brackets instead. Now, curly brackets are very important to our if statement. So these curly brackets are ways for us to indicate we're containing a section of code that belongs to that statement. And rather than simply saying a semicolon, which is one line of code, we can use a curly bracket to say, hey, anything inside of here is part of this if block of code. And another way for us to kind of help stylize this to help us remember is that anything that's going to be inside those curly brackets should be tabbed over one line to really show that it's part of it. It's just a nice visual indication. It doesn't affect the actual running of the program, but as a programmer, it's a nice visual way for us to kind of see that is a lot easier to find. Now, when we start looking at the actual placement of some of these brackets here, you may notice that sometimes code can be either written like this: if x is less than or equal to 5, curly bracket, system.out.println, x is less than 5, and a curly bracket. Or we might say it like this: if x is less than or equal to 5, a new line, curly bracket, system.out.println, x is less than 5, and curly bracket. There is really kind of no difference here. These are both the exact same code. They just follow some different conventions. And if you're using Eclipse, it's going to kind of follow the first version by default. If you're using a different IDE, it might follow a different one. It just really all depends on what you're using. Again, both of these are the same code. It just becomes user preference as to which one that you kind of prefer. Some people will say you use one way or another. It doesn't really matter to me personally which one you use, as long as you're consistent which style and convention you're using. And now let's go ahead and get ready to do some programming with an if statement. And so I'm going to go ahead and I've created a quick program here. I'm actually going to go ahead and let's do some static values here. So let's just say num1, and let's go ahead and equal that to, let's say, 15. And we're going to set num2 equal to, let's say, 10. And I'm going to leave these other two for usernum and usernum2 because I'm going to go ahead and let those be pulled from the keyboard. So let's go ahead and set that up first and get some input for this. This is at this point something that we are very familiar with. So I'm just going to have them enter into numbers. And let's go ahead and just do so we have user num1, and we're going to be keyboard.nextInt. And then we'll do user num2, and the same thing, kb.nextInt. Perfect. So now these are two numbers. And now let's go ahead and give the user a response here just to say we're going to begin testing inequality. So system.out.println, testing for inequality. All right. And so now we can do our if statement. So let's go ahead and first, for example, test num1 and num2. So I'm just going to add a comment here that says test num1 and num2, just to keep track of what I'm doing here. So if, let's just say num1 is less than num2, and I'm just going to go ahead and add this in here and just say system.out.println. That's print, I want println. And we'll just say num1 is greater than num2. Oh, I almost forgot my quotes there. Num1 is greater than num2. Perfect. And now that this is done, we can, of course, test this. But I'm going to go ahead and actually add another one in here. So let's go ahead and test this now for the user num. So let's test user num1 and user num2. And let's just go ahead and change this to user num1 and user num2. And oh, I just realized I have this backwards. I have greater than instead of less than. Oh, quick fix there. There we go. That, a little embarrassing, but we got it now. And so when we go ahead and run our program, it should, of course, say enter in two numbers. So let's just do 4 and 5. And testing for inequality, we get num1 is less than num2, which is correct because num1, let's see, is num1 is 15. Is it less than num2? Great. Oh, it's because we just noticed that this is not correct because 15 and 10, because we didn't change this output statement here. So always make sure that you have the correct statement here to make sure that you are getting the right output. There we go. Differentiate that again. So let's do this again. 4 and 5. There we go. Test rate inequality. User num1 is less than user num2. Now, the thing you'll notice, in both of those cases, even though I made a mistake there with my output message, that we have the correct thing being displayed. Now, it didn't display both of them because in this case, this statement right here, we look to say, is num1 less than num2? Well, no, because 15 is not less than 10. And so it's never going to actually print this out unless I have a condition where those are met. So if I go ahead and flip this around, let's just go ahead and just make this greater than here, as we originally had. So let's make it greater than num2. Now we should see, do 4 and 5 again. We get num1 is greater than num2. User num1 is less than user num2. And that's a really quick, easy way for us to test that with inequalities. And if we were to go ahead and let's just go ahead and say these are, let's say, 15. So I'm going to do 15 and 15 because I want to show this real quick. 15 and 15 means these are equal. And if they are equal, you'll notice when I go ahead and enter these numbers in that this no longer displays because these are equal. Equal does not mean it's greater than or less than. It's simply equal. So if I wanted this to display, I'd have to add an equal sign in here. And then when I run this, you'll see it again prints this out because technically this is true because 15 is greater than or equal to 15.